Well, it's time to start the show.
What time is it?
What, you can't tell time?
Of course I can. It's time to start the show. See? I told them.
No. Look, where's the big hand?
It's on your big wrist.
No, on the watch, Bobby.
Well, big hand's there, and the little hand's there.
So, what time is it?
It's time to start the show.
Hey everybody, it's me, Bryson Booker, and it's time for a BBTV cartoon review just for you and you and you and you and all of you nannies out there who are really men. Yes, I'm talking to you. Mrs. Doubtfires, I'm talking to you. But I'm actually going to be talking about a particular cartoon episode that basically plays with that same theme, just like the original movie from 1993 did. And it's an episode from Bobby's World. Now, okay, Bobby's World, you either love it or hate it. It was a Fox Kids original show that premiered in 1990, lasted from 90 all the way to 1998. So, actually, it's celebrating its anniversary, I believe, next month. The last episode of Bobby's World aired February 1998. So, it did last a pretty good while, and this is one of the episodes from Season 5, which aired November 14th, 1994. And it's called Mrs. Noogie Fire. Obviously, it's a play on the movie Mrs. Doubtfire that stars Robin Williams, released in 1993, a year before. And so, I'm basically going to give you a summary of the episode and just tell you my overall thoughts about it. Okay, so Mrs. Noogie Fire from Bobby's World is basically about Martha and Howie Mandel, Bobby's parents, go on a vacation. So Howie has to go do something for his international pants thing. He's going to an international pants convention, and his wife, Martha, is going with them. And so they need someone to babysit the kids. Okay? And so Bobby kind of, puts Uncle Ted's name in and says, hey, he can watch us. And Martha's like, no. Because, Uncle Ted is a slob. He doesn't really clean up after himself. He loves to eat. He basically can focus on everything else but the kids. And Martha's like, no. And so, Bobby is kind of upset about that, as well as he's kind of upset because his mom and dad won't let him go to this amusement park where we can ride all of these rides that'll make him sick. So Bobby thinks if he can get Uncle Ted to be his babysitter, then Uncle Ted will let him go to the amusement park and ride all of those rides that his mother said he can't do. And so, basically, Martha and Howie have to look for a nanny to watch the kids. And so, Bobby reveals to Uncle Ted that his mom wanted a woman to watch the kids. And so, what does Uncle Ted do? He basically dresses as a woman and calls himself Mrs. Noogie Fire to get hired by Bobby's parents to watch them and kind of prove his worth as a parent, like he can do it. And so that's what the episode is basically about. Obviously, if you have seen the movie Mrs. Doubtfire, they basically took that same premise and kind of switched it just a little bit. Basically, Daniel, the main character of Mrs. Doubtfire, gets fired from his job, and his wife is sick of him, so his wife schedules a divorce, but Daniel still wants to see his children. So in order to see his children, basically Daniel acts as a nanny, and so he dresses up as a woman, becoming Mrs. Doubtfire. Basically the same plot as this episode's premise, just with a slightly different theme at the beginning and a slightly different ending. But basically, this is just the Bobby's World take on that movie. And I'm going to start telling you about what I think about it now. So basically, I'm glad that they chose a more simpler theme than the movie. Instead of, having the dad suffer a great loss and, all of this stuff happening in Bobby's family, that would have just took another 15 minutes just for them to do that. But to just say, Bobby's parents are going on vacation, they need a nanny, that's a simple theme where they could easily fit Uncle Ted becoming Mrs. Noogie Fire into. And so I'm glad they didn't try to go exactly the way the movie went. I'm glad they went their own way and said, hey, we can make a story from this. And, people will catch the reference if they've seen the movie. And definitely, if you watch this episode, you will catch some similarities that this episode has with the movie Mrs. Doubtfire. And you can tell that some of the scenes and predicaments that Bobby and Uncle Ted and the rest of them get into, do compare with the movie and the movie's problems. But I think one of my favorite parts in this episode was when Aunt Ruth came to check up on Uncle Ted. And this is kind of similar to the movie where the inspector comes to check on Mrs. Mrs. Doubtfire in the house and the kids that she's babysitting. And so Aunt Ruth from Bobby's World checks up on Uncle Ted, or Mrs. Noogiefire, and sees how he's doing. And I think the best part in the episode is when she says, I want to see Uncle Ted and Mrs. Noogiefire in the same location. And so Ted's losing his mind, and, the kids come in, Derek and Kelly, and they have to make up a big excuse to kind of think why, tell Aunt Ruth why she can't see Mrs. Noogiefire and Uncle Ted at the same time. And so that was a twist, definitely, that was not seen in the original Mrs. Doubtfire, as well as a slight relationship scene with some Bobby's World side characters. I think Snurd and I forget the other one's name. But there's kind of like a side plot with them. They like Mrs. Noogiefire, and that again is a play on the movie with that one guy on the bus liked Mrs. Doubtfire. And so, as you can probably tell, they did take a lot from the original movie, but there's that Bobby's World twist to let you know, hey, this is something different. And obviously it has a slightly different storyline. It's not as funny as the movie. It tries to be. It definitely tries to be. But basically this episode is letting you know that it's a reference to something else. And they make it pretty darn obvious that it is a reference to something else. I mean, they only got 22 minutes, so just might as well make the best of it. And they pretty much did, They added their own flair to it, but, for those of you who haven't seen Mrs. Doubtfire, and for those of us, many of us that have seen Mrs. Doubtfire, you know what they took from the movie. And you know their twist, and the twist that they want to portray through what they took from the movie. And it's pretty decent. It's a pretty decent episode, and basically at the end of it, I'm just going to spoil it. It's right here on YouTube, so if you want to watch it. But Uncle Ted basically proves his worth as a parent, and, Bobby's parents can trust Uncle Ted to watch them. And so by the end of the episode, Ted is a trustful parent, and basically Bobby's parents trust him to watch the kids again. And so that's the end of it. So Uncle Ted literally had to go through the depths of being a woman, just like Robin Williams did, just to be with his mates, his basically children. But the only difference in that is Robin Williams wanted to be with his children. He didn't want to be pulled away from his children. Uncle Ted did it just to prove that he can watch the kids, or Bobby and his siblings. That's basically it. So yes, they did. Bobby's World did take their own twist on that. I'm glad they didn't do the exact story like Mrs. Doubtfire. They kind of twisted it up a little bit, and using a character like Uncle Ted and the way that he is, it made sense that Uncle Ted had to prove his worth as someone who could watch someone else's children. Because generally, Uncle Ted makes an appearance in every other episode of Bobby's World. So, I mean, he sees them almost all the time. So, I'm glad they went their own way on that and did their own little twist. And it basically made the episode just a pleasure to watch. And I would definitely view it again. It definitely reminds me of the movie. And it'll definitely remind you of Mrs. Doubtfire when you watch it. So, it's Mrs. Noogiefire, released by Bobby's World. It's a Bobby's World episode released November 14th. 1994. Check it out here on YouTube. It's a great episode.